I was talking last time about how you need to understand that when the West, the sort of official voice of the West, the governments, the media, the elites, companies, corporations, and so on, when they use words like morals or values, or when they use words like justice or human rights or peace or what have you, I was saying they mean something completely different than what most people mean when they use those words. But I got a lot of comments from people saying, oh, yeah, that's doublespeak or hypocrisy or deception. But no, this is actually what I was trying to explain at that time. I normally wouldn't do a follow-up if people misunderstood what I said, but I think this is extremely important to understand. It's not doublespeak. It's not hypocrisy, and it's not deception. No, they are being completely honest. This was my point. They're being completely honest, completely accurate when they depict, for example, the genocide in Gaza as being completely justified and defensive. They're being completely honest when they said that 1 million babies dying in Iraq from a decade of sanctions was worth it. They're not being hypocritical. They're not saying one thing and meaning another thing. These are their actual values, and you have to understand this. There is a fundamental and profound difference between their values and our values. They're not contradicting their values. You must understand, they're not betraying their values. They are acting on their values with consistency and continuity. Committing massacres against innocent civilians does not trouble their conscience, any more than you stepping on a bug troubles your conscience. They don't see anything to feel guilty about. They feel that they've done something good. You have to understand this, because if you don't, you will severely and dangerously underestimate their danger. And you'll make the fatal mistake of believing that you can ever appeal to their sense of morality, that you can ever appeal to their conscience. And you'll make the catastrophic mistake of trusting them or trusting their intentions. And wallahi, there are tens of millions of their victims crying out from their graves, telling you not to trust them. Just like someone watching a horror movie and shouting at the screen, telling the main character, don't go down that dark alley. If you could hear the voices of their millions of victims, they would tell you exactly what's going to happen to you if you listen to them and if you trust them. If you're Muslim, or you're not white, or you're not rich, you need to recognize that they have zero moral hesitation about killing you. Yes, whether you live outside of America or whether you live inside of America, it's the same to them. The worst thing you can do is ever underestimate this reality. Listen, just like with an individual, you can learn what their values are by what their actions are, much better than by what their words are. People can tell you all kinds of things about what their values are, what they believe, and so on, what their morals are. But their actions, their deeds will tell you the truth. You don't know anything about what they believe by their words alone. You have to see to what extent their actions align with their words, because people do things that they believe are morally acceptable. Now, sure, that doesn't mean that people always act in accordance with their conscience. People can slip up. There can be aberrations. We're human beings. But the actions that someone commits habitually, regularly, routinely, with consistency, this is what they believe in. Whatever they say to the contrary is just them lying either to you or to themselves or both. But you have to believe what they do, not what they say. And like I said, when they say that what they do is moral, then that tells you what they consider to be moral behavior. Because it's not like America ever apologized for their wrongs. Until now, they've got the Native Americans holed up in reservations, and they're poisoning them right now with uranium. And I'm telling you, they're doing that because they believe it is morally acceptable to do that. No, don't you ever think that they are like you and I. They're not like us. This is incredibly dangerous. They're bloodthirsty, and they see nothing wrong whatsoever in quenching that thirst. The same way that you see nothing wrong with drinking a glass of water, they can spill your blood with the same nonchalance. And all you have to do is look at their history to know that. And they'll always say, oh, every civilization was violent. Every empire was violent. America isn't unique, or the West isn't unique about that. There's nothing strangely distinct about the West in terms of violence. Okay, let's look at the Muslims. Because this is something that they love to talk about. Muslim conquest, Muslim wars, jihad, Islam spread by the sword, and what have you, right? Part of being a Muslim is that you have to tell the truth. Whether it's for you or against you, you have to tell the truth. We don't get to spin narratives and pretend that those narratives are reality. We have to actually be honest. So I'll tell you, over the course of 1400 years, millions of non-Muslims died at the hands of Muslims. That's a fact. No denying it. Obviously, exact figures are impossible to ascertain. And the numbers of casualties in battles back in those old days are generally understood to be exaggerated. But according to historians, from the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam until today, somewhere between 15 to 25 million non-Muslims have been killed by Muslims. That includes the battles in Persia, Byzantine Empire, the Levant, Egypt, and so on. The early conquests, it includes Spain, all the battles of the Umayyads, the Abbasids, the Seljuks, the Ottomans, and so on. It also includes the massacres against the Armenians and the Assyrians. It even includes the civil war in Sudan, South Sudan, Darfur. It even includes acts of terrorism by like Al-Qaeda and ISIS and others. Now, of course, overwhelmingly, the majority of those casualties throughout history have been soldiers in battle, not civilians. But there were civilians too, obviously. So over the course of 1,400 years, Muslims killed around 15 to 25 million non-Muslims. That sounds like a lot, right? That makes you think that, yeah, it's true. Every civilization, every empire was violent. So why point to the West so particularly? Well, because in roughly a third of that amount of time, the West killed 275 million more people. You slaughtered, genocided, starved, bombed, murdered 300 million people in just the last 500 years. In fact, America alone has killed in just my lifetime almost as many people as the total killed by the Muslims in 1,400 years. Imagine. You killed in just the last 50 years the equivalent of all non-Muslims killed in every war ever fought by the Muslim empires in over a millennium. That's why we point to the West specifically. Do you understand? Because that's strange. It's abnormal. It's unique. And by the way, from that 300 million that you killed through slavery, through colonization, through engineered famines, through sanctions, and through war, we're not even talking about mostly soldiers being killed. We're talking about mostly civilians. Even in your wars, between 50% to 70% of the casualties have been civilians. Yes, you stand out in history. So like I said, you know people by their deeds. You know them, you know what they believe by their deeds, their habitual, continuous deeds, not their aberrations. Okay? The Spanish conquest of the Americas, 70 million dead. British colonialism, minimum 150 million killed. The transatlantic slave trade, at least 15 to 25 million killed. French colonial wars, 25 million. Congo, 20 million. Genocide of the Native Americans, upwards of 90 to 100 million. On and on. The Holocaust, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Iraq, Afghanistan, now Gaza. It doesn't stop with you. The fact is that the Muslim empire across time, relative to its size and duration, has the least amount of blood spilt than any other empire in human history, and that's a fact. Even if you go back to the Roman Empire. Our conquests were the least destructive, our conquests were the least deadly, and the most successful and the most peaceful in integrating and tolerating and cultivating the people of the lands that we entered. Versus the total annihilation, extermination, enslavement, subjugation, pillage, and plunder of what you all did. This is your way. You were and are absolutely outstanding at it. Outstanding as in you stand out because of it. And you do that because you truly believe in it. And like I said, you really don't care if your victims are outside of America or inside of America. Because if you look inside America, what do you see? You see a society built on brutality, a nation whose foundation is violence, not just internationally, but domestically as well. The same ethos that drove the slaughter of the indigenous people, the enslavement of Africans, the subjugation of entire nations abroad, is the same ethos that fuels the police brutality in your streets, the economic strangulation of your poor, the educational deprivation of entire communities, the mass incarceration of your underclass, and the legal subjugation of so-called minority groups. I mean, just look at the statistics. You have more people in prison than any other country on earth, both in absolute numbers and per capita. Over 2 million people behind bars, and a disproportionately high number of them are so-called black people, African Americans, and Latinos. The so-called land of the free runs a for-profit prison industry where corporations like Core Civic and Geo Group literally make money from human suffering. That's why America criminalizes poverty, why minor infractions turn into life sentences, and why recidivism is designed into the system, because prisons are a business and human lives are commodities. What about police brutality? Well, every year, I've talked about this so many times, thousands of Americans, thousands, are gunned down by the very people who are sworn to protect you. Your police departments are outfitted like military units, armed with tanks, automatic weapons, treating their own citizens like they're an occupying army, the way an occupying army treats an enemy population. And who bears the brunt of this? Who are the prime targets for this domestic war? It's African Americans, Latino youth, indigenous communities, so-called minorities, members of the global majority. The same groups that have been subjected to violence for centuries in their countries of origin. And then there's your economic violence. The way your whole system is structured ensures that the rich get rich and the poor get crushed under an unbearable weight of debt, stagnating wages, impossible cost of living, on and on. How many millions of Americans are just one medical emergency away from bankruptcy? You know, how many families are living paycheck to paycheck, unable to afford health care, unable to afford housing or education? The American economic system is not broken. Understand this. It's functioning exactly as it was designed to function, to extract wealth from the many to funnel it to the few. And if you're born poor in America, well, the system ensures that you stay that way. Your education system is not an equalizer, it's a caste system. Schools in wealthy areas are well funded with top tier facilities, while schools in poor neighborhoods are neglected. They're underfunded and they're deliberately set up to fail, setting their students up to fail. And the reason is obvious, because an educated population is dangerous. An informed citizenry questions authority and challenges injustice. It demands fairness, and America's elites cannot afford that. So they keep entire communities ignorant. They keep them disempowered. They keep them hopeless, funneling them into either the prison system or the cycle of wage slavery. And we all know that discrimination in America is woven into the very fabric of your laws, the very fabric of your institutions and everyday interactions. So-called Black Americans are still fighting for basic human dignity, for fair treatment in the courts, in housing, fair treatment in housing and employment and so on. Native Americans, like I say, are still confined to reservations, their land still stolen, their water poisoned, their sovereignty ignored. And all of this, the brutality, the oppression, the violence, is not accidental. It's the natural consequence of a nation built on exploitation. America doesn't simply commit atrocities abroad. It practices the same cruelty within its own borders. The same system that bombs and starves nations overseas is the same system that allows African Americans to be lynched in broad daylight by the police, allows corporations to strip their workers of humanity, and turns entire cities into wastelands of poverty and despair for corporate profits. The most dangerous mistake that you can make is to think that this system can be reformed. To think that those who benefit from that system will one day grow a conscience, because they won't. They're doing exactly what they believe is right. Exactly what their values dictate. And unless you recognize this, unless you understand the nature of what you're dealing with, you will continue to be trapped in an illusion, thinking that change will come from within a system that was designed to crush you. The brutality is not a bug. It's the system working exactly as intended. Nothing's gone wrong. The misery and the bloodshed and the savagery all fall under their definition of morality. And that completely disorients anyone who knows it's immoral. And in that state of disorientation, they get the drop on you. That disorientation is all part of their hunting strategy. You know, when a lamb thinks about food, he's thinking about grazing in the field. But when a wolf thinks about food, he's thinking about that lamb. It's the same word, food, but two completely different understandings about what is intended by that word. So no, as a Muslim, we have to tell the truth. And I have to tell you the truth about that country. It's my country. It's where I come from. I know its ways. My ancestors were Irish, colonized for 800 years. Now you come to tell me, try to convince me that it's all because of the Jews, because of the Zionists, because of AIPAC. No, we can sniff that out right away, what that is. That's blame shifting, shifting responsibility. I mean, I could go along with it too. That's the easiest thing in the world to go along with. That's what they're going to do anyway next. That's the program. That's going to become the new official narrative. Israel blackmailed them. No, the Israelis are responsible for every crime that they committed, but every crime that they committed was on your behalf, and everyone knows it. You got a people, you have never done anything but hate for centuries to commit crimes on your behalf, colonial crimes, genocidal crimes, so that you can slither your way out of accountability when the time comes. The more you big up your so-called Judeo-Christian camaraderie, the more you big up your undying devotion to Israel, well, the more you'll be able to act like you've been betrayed. And you can justify cutting them loose. I see what you're doing. No one will ever be able to accuse you of being anti-Jewish because of all the love that you expressed, all the support you gave, and all the praise that you showered on them. But genocide apparently didn't feel like betrayal. Mass murder didn't hurt your feelings. But if they've got dirt on Bobby Kennedy Jr., that's crossing a red line, is it? If they took pictures of you at Epstein Island, that's betrayal. That's dastardly. Not murdering over 50,000 men, women, and children in Gaza. You see their morality? They'll use something like this to cut Israel loose, not ethnic cleansing. And they think that they're going to be able to wash their hands of 8 decades of brutality that they sponsored, that they funded, that they armed, that they provided political coverage for. America always needs 2 things. They need an enemy to brutalize, and they need a mechanism of plausible deniability to try to maintain their image of innocence of the brutality that they commit. Oh yes, I could go along with that narrative. You know, lay all the blame at the feet of the Jews. Allah knows there's millions of Muslims who are ready to also go along with it. Because they are still so enamored themselves with the West, so colonized in their own mind, so indoctrinated with their love for America and so propagandized and so inculcated with white supremacy themselves that they can't bear to face the reality that no one has ever had to blackmail America into committing atrocities. In fact, it's the exact opposite. The only way to make them not commit atrocities is to pay them off. They've been in the protection racket and the extortion business ever since they had a navy. But I can't go along with that narrative, that blame-shifting narrative. Yes, the Israelis are guilty, but they're nothing but a bunch of white European atheist colonizers. They're nothing but a pseudo-Jewish brigade of American imperialism. That's what they are, imposing American values on Palestine. Every century that America has existed, since 1776, every century has had a higher death toll than the last. From the hundreds of thousands in the 18th century to the millions in the 19th century to the tens of millions in the 20th century, and you're already over 6 million in just the last 20 years. You don't get to be that continuously violent, that consistently savage, and that persistently psychopathic and still get to call yourselves the greatest country on earth unless that is exactly how you measure greatness. You understand? You've killed in just the last 2 decades almost half the total deaths Muslims caused through dozens and dozens of battles over 1,000 years. You know, you'll say that's because of technology, but you don't understand that that's nothing but an admission of what I'm saying. It's a confession. Because violence and brutality are made possible by 2 capabilities, the weapons and the will. In other words, there's no question about you having the will. So the more technologically sophisticated you become, it just means that the scale of your violence will increase. Because it's just a given that you're going to be violent. Because again, that's what you believe in. Those are your morals. Those are your values. Like, of course, we're going to kill. And if we have more efficient ways of killing, then obviously we're just going to kill even more. That's what you're saying. I mean, I know we'll never get the predator to own up to his predatory, bloodthirsty values, but at least the victims need to face the reality. The global South, the Muslim world, the Muslims in America, so-called minorities in America, the poor in America, everyone needs to know. A wolf's conscience is not bothered when he devours his prey. He doesn't see a victim, he just sees a meal. And he's not going to change his nature. He's got his hunting strategy, so you have to focus on your survival strategy. So at the very least, you have to recognize when you're looking at a wolf.